My grandma made our whole family play the honesty game every Christmas Eve. This year, it destroyed us. Every Christmas Eve, my grandmother made us play the honesty game. I know how that sounds. And trust me, I wish someone had stopped her the very first time she introduced it, back in 1987, before any of us kids were even old enough to understand what honesty could cost a family. But nobody stopped her. Nobody ever stopped Grandma Ruth from doing anything, because Grandma Ruth was the kind of woman who filled every room she walked into so completely that the walls seemed to lean inward, like even the house was listening to her. The honesty game was simple. After dinner, after the dishes were cleared, after the good tablecloth was folded and put away, we would all gather in the living room, every cousin, every aunt and uncle, every stray family friend who'd been absorbed into the holiday over the decades, and Grandma Ruth would pull out a little wooden box she kept on the mantel next to a photo of my late grandfather. Inside the box were slips of paper, and on each slip was a question she had written herself. You drew a question. You answered it. Honestly. No lying, no dodging, no, I'd rather not say. That was the rule. Grandma Ruth said her own mother had taught her that secrets were how families rotted from the inside, like fruit left in a bowl too long. She said the honesty game was how she kept her family fresh. Her word, fresh. When I was 7, I pulled a question that said, what is something you took that didn't belong to you? I confessed to stealing a pack of Reese's Pieces from the corner store. Everyone laughed. My cousin Tommy said he'd once taken $5 from his dad's dresser. More laughter. My Uncle Dave admitted he kept a library book from 1974 and never returned it. The room was warm and bright and smelled like pine needles and my grandmother's perfume, and the honesty game felt like the most wonderful thing in the world. It felt like belonging. That's the thing about traditions that eventually destroy you, they start as love. For 26 years, I looked forward to Christmas Eve more than any other day on the calendar. I'm 33 now, and I spent most of my 20s dragging whatever boyfriend I was seeing at the time to my grandmother's house in western Pennsylvania. A rambling 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on the left side and creaked in a way that sounded, if you were in the right mood, like music. My family is big. My dad, Gerald, was one of 4 siblings, Ruth's children, and each of those siblings had between 2 and 4 kids of their own. Add in spouses and long-term partners, and by the time I was an adult, Christmas Eve at Grandma Ruth's meant somewhere between 30 and 40 people packed into that colonial, spilling out onto the porch with their wine glasses, children running figure eights around everybody's legs. My dad's siblings were, in order, Aunt Pamela, the oldest, who taught middle school history and had opinions about everything, Uncle Dave, the one who kept the library book, who was gentle and quiet and married a woman named Susan who made the best potato salad I've ever eaten in my life, and Uncle Richie, the youngest, who was loud and funny and who I privately suspected was my grandmother's favorite even though she'd never have admitted it. I was the oldest of my generation, my parents' only child, which meant I had been playing the honesty game longer than any of my cousins. I had also, over the years, developed what I privately thought of as a strategy. The questions in the box ranged enormously. Some were light. What's a lie you told as a kid that you never got caught for? Some were heavier. What is something you regret about your marriage? The trick, I had learned, was to give an honest answer that revealed just enough to satisfy the spirit of the game without handing anyone a grenade. My family had been playing this way for years. We were all, I think, doing some version of the same thing, being honest within carefully maintained limits. The tradition worked because we all respected the invisible fence. Last Christmas Eve, someone crossed it. There were 34 of us that night. The dinner had been magnificent in the way that my grandmother's dinners always were, not because the food was particularly fancy, but because there was so much of it, and because she had made all of it herself, starting 2 days before, moving around that kitchen with a focus and efficiency that put people half her age to shame. She was 78. She had a bad hip and mild arthritis in her right hand, and she moved through her kitchen like she was 25 and invincible. After dinner, when the good tablecloth was folded, I helped my cousin Brianna carry in extra chairs from the garage so everyone could fit in the living room. The fire was going. My grandfather's photo was taken from the mantel. The little wooden box sat beside it, the same as it always did, the brass hinges tarnished to a warm brown. Who wants to go first? Grandma Ruth said. The usual volunteers, the cousins who were young enough to still find the whole thing exciting, reached into the box immediately. A 12-year-old named Cooper, Uncle Richie's youngest, drew a question and announced with great solemnity that he had once eaten an entire box of fudge rounds and blamed it on the dog. The room laughed. The dog in question had been dead for 6 years, and Cooper looked genuinely relieved to have finally confessed. Questions went around the room. My Aunt Pamela drew one asking about her biggest professional regret and gave a long, thoughtful answer about a student she felt she hadn't advocated for hard enough in 1998. Uncle Dave drew one about a time he'd been truly afraid and talked about a cancer scare he'd had in his 40s that turned out to be nothing, but that had kept him awake for 6 weeks. Serious, but safe. My cousin Brianna drew a question that made her laugh so hard she almost fell off her chair. What is something you genuinely believe that you're too embarrassed to say in public? She said she believed that cats were operating on a cognitive level we didn't fully understand and that they were, in some fundamental way, judging us. More laughter. The room was warm. The fire popped. I drew my question and looked at it. What is something you know about this family that you think others have forgotten? I sat with it for a moment. I had a few options. I could talk about how my grandfather, before he died, had told me that the house had been bought with money he won in a poker game and that my grandmother didn't know and had thought it was his military savings. Sweet story. Safe. Or I could talk about how I knew that my dad had gotten a partial scholarship to Penn State that he'd turned down to stay close to home because my grandmother had been going through something difficult that year. something nobody in the family ever discussed directly, and that he'd never once, in my entire life, mentioned the sacrifice. I chose the scholarship story. My dad looked at the floor. My grandmother looked at her hands. A few people who hadn't known looked at my dad with a new kind of tenderness. Why didn't you ever say anything? My cousin Brianna asked him. My dad shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. It was a very big deal, my grandmother said quietly, and the room held that moment like you hold a bird, carefully, aware that it could fly away. Then my Uncle Richie reached into the box. Uncle Richie was 51 years old. He'd been married twice, his first wife, Carol, had left him when I was in high school, and he'd remarried a woman named Deborah about 8 years ago. He had 3 kids, my cousins Tyler and Melissa from his first marriage, and young Cooper from his second. He was, as I said, the funny one. He was the one who did impressions at dinner and who remembered every embarrassing story about everyone and deployed them with the precision of a surgeon. He pulled his slip of paper from the box. He read it. His face did something I had never seen it do in 33 years of knowing him. It went still, not quiet thoughtful still, not reading carefully still the way a street goes still right before something happens, that absence of sound that is itself a kind of sound. Richie? My grandmother said. He looked up from the paper. He looked at my grandmother. Then he looked across the room at my Aunt Pamela, who was sitting with her wine glass halfway to her lips, and I watched her face do the same thing his had just done. The same stillness, the same sudden, total quiet. What does it say? My cousin Tyler asked. Tyler was 24 and had never been good at reading rooms. Uncle Richie set the paper down on his knee, face up, so anyone sitting close enough could read it. I wasn't close enough. It says, Uncle Richie said, and his voice had changed in a way that I felt in my back teeth. What is a secret about this family that you have been asked to keep? The room was very quiet now. Not the comfortable quiet of a moment being held. A different kind of quiet. I don't have to answer that, he said. It wasn't a question. It was something between a question and a statement, directed entirely at my grandmother. And here is the thing. The rule had always been no dodging. In 26 years of the honesty game, I had never once seen anyone refuse to answer. Grandma Ruth had made it a point of honor, of family pride. The rule was the rule. She had said it herself, every year, before the box was opened. No lying, no dodging, no, I'd rather not say. She was looking at her youngest son with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not in 26 years. Not when my grandfather died, not when Richie's first marriage fell apart, not when my dad's mother, her own mother-in-law who she'd never liked, had shown up at Thanksgiving uninvited 6 years running. She looked afraid. Richie, she said again. Just his name, just the 2 syllables, and I could hear everything inside them, the warning, the plea, the decades of whatever this was. Mom, he said, you wrote the question. I write all the questions. Did you write this one on purpose? She didn't answer. The fire popped again. Outside, it had started to snow. I could see it through the front window, soft and indifferent, coming down on the porch and the yard and the street, coating everything equally. There's a life insurance policy, Uncle Richie said. The room stayed quiet. I think we all thought, hoped, that was the whole thing. A life insurance policy. That was manageable. That was the kind of secret that was awkward but not seismic. Dad didn't have one when he died, Richie continued. You told us he didn't. That there was nothing. He paused. But there was. There was a policy for $400,000, and Mom, you transferred it. Before he died, you transferred the beneficiary. My Aunt Pamela set her wine glass down on the end table. You transferred it to yourself and then when he died you collected it and you didn't tell any of us and I found out 3 years ago because I was helping you sort through the filing cabinet and I found the paperwork, and you asked me, to forget I'd ever seen it. The fire, the snow, 34 people in a room and the sound of 34 people not breathing. That was my father's money, Pamela said. Her voice was completely flat. It was also your mother's husband's money, my grandmother said, and her voice was steady in the way that very old people's voices can be steady, not from calm but from a lifetime of practice at holding yourself together when everything is trying to come apart. That's not, Pamela stopped. Started again. That's not the point. The point is you lied. When Dad died, you told us there was nothing. We were 22, 25, 28, and you told us there was nothing and we believed you. We believed you. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, and then she pulled it back. Gerald believed you. All of us looked at my dad. My dad was 56 years old. He was a quiet man who coached Little League for 15 years after I stopped playing, just because he liked being outside in the summer and liked kids and didn't know what else to do with himself on Saturday mornings. He was the one who gave up his scholarship. He was the one who stayed close to home because something was hard for his mother that year, and he had never said a word about it, and he had never once, as far as I knew, asked for anything in return. He was looking at his mother. She was looking at him. I had debts, she said. Your father didn't know about all of them. I couldn't, she stopped. I couldn't tell you, children. You were grieving. I was trying to keep the house. The house has been paid off for 20 years, Pamela said. Things were different then. Were you going to tell us? My dad asked. His voice was very quiet. Ever? My grandmother looked at her hands again. The hands with arthritis. The hands that had made the dinner, that had folded the tablecloth, that had filled the little wooden box with slips of paper every year for 26 years to keep the family fresh, to keep the secrets from rotting us from the inside. I don't know, she said. I'm not going to tell you the rest of that night in detail because some of it isn't mine to tell. What I will tell you is that it lasted a long time. Those voices were raised and then lowered and then raised again. My cousin Tyler, who was bad at reading rooms, eventually took the younger kids upstairs and put on a movie, which was perhaps the most useful thing anyone did all night. That my Uncle Dave, gentle and quiet, sat next to my grandmother for most of it and didn't say much but also didn't leave, which I think was its own kind of statement. That my Aunt Pamela at one point stood up and put on her coat and left the house and came back 40 minutes later with snow on her shoulders, not saying where she'd been. That my dad, at some point in the middle of everything, got up and went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of tea, one for himself and one for his mother, and sat back down next to her and didn't say anything at all, just handed her the cup, and she took it. That gesture wrecked me more than anything else that happened. It's been almost 3 months since that Christmas Eve. The house in western Pennsylvania is still standing. Grandma Ruth is still in it, as far as I know. She turned 79 in January and my dad went to visit her, though I don't know exactly what was said between them. Aunt Pamela has not been back to the house since that night, and from what my dad tells me, she and my grandmother have spoken on the phone exactly once, briefly, and it did not go well. Uncle Richie called me in January, a little drunk, and said he was sorry for how it had all come out, not sorry for the truth, he said, but sorry for the venue, for the timing, for the fact that Cooper had been there and that Tyler, who is still bad at reading rooms, had apparently been up in the kids' room that night not watching the movie but listening at the top of the stairs. Why did you keep it for 3 years? I asked him. Long pause. Because she's my mom, he said. Because she's 78 and she's got a bad hip and she makes the best Christmas Eve dinner in the world and I didn't want to be the one who, he stopped. I didn't want to be the one. But you drew the question. I know. She wrote the question. Another long pause. Yeah, he said. I know. I've thought about that a lot. Whether my grandmother wrote that question intentionally. After 3 years of Richie knowing, after 3 years of her knowing that he knew, she wrote that particular question and put it in that particular box because she was tired. Because secrets are heavy and she was 78 and her hip hurt and she had been carrying this thing for 23 years and maybe, in some part of herself, she wanted it done. Whether the honesty game, after all this time, finally worked exactly as intended. Here is what I keep coming back to. There is a version of this story where the tradition is the villain. Where my grandmother's insistence on honesty, on freshness, on her mother's belief that secrets rot families from the inside, is a kind of arrogance, a pressure cooker that was always going to eventually blow. And I think that version is partly true. But there's another version where the tradition had nothing to do with it. Where a woman made a desperate decision in grief and fear when she was 55 years old and then spent 23 years unable to undo it. Where the truth was always there, in the filing cabinet, and the only question was who would eventually find it and what would happen when they did. Christmas Eve, the living room, the wooden box, those were just the location. The explosion would have happened somewhere. I don't know which version is right. I think about my dad handing his mother a cup of tea in the middle of everything. I think about how he turned down Penn State and never said a word. I think about my grandmother at 22, believing that her family stayed fresh because nobody was allowed to keep secrets, and then spending the next half-century keeping the biggest one she had. I think about the questions she wrote. All of them, over all those years. How she must have sat down before every Christmas Eve and thought about what she wanted her family to say out loud. What she thought we needed to confess, to release, to hand over to each other in that warm room with the fire going. Whether she ever wrote a question meant for herself and then put it back. We didn't finish the game that night. There were still slips of paper in the box when everything fell apart, 15 or 20 of them, folded and waiting. I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if my grandmother has already filled the box for next Christmas, writing out her questions at the kitchen table the way she always does, or if the box is still sitting on the mantel next to my grandfather's photo, closed, gathering dust. I don't know if there will be a next Christmas Eve. Not the way there used to be. Not all 34 of us, porch creaking, pine needles, potato salad, Cooper confessing about the fudge rounds. I hope there will be. I genuinely do. I think my dad hopes so too, and I think that hope is the same reason he handed her that cup of tea, not because everything was okay, not because he'd forgiven her, maybe not even because he was sure he could, but because she was his mother and she was 78 and the snow was coming down outside and some part of him understood, maybe better than anyone, that you can love someone and be failed by them at the same time. That those two things don't cancel each other out. He is the one who stayed. He has always been the one who stayed. Someone asked me recently, a friend who knew something had happened at Christmas, whether I was angry. I had to think about it. At who? I finally said. She shrugged. Any of them. Your grandmother. Your uncle for keeping it. The tradition, I guess. I'm sad, I said. I think I'm mostly sad. She asked what I was sad about and I tried to explain it and I'm not sure I did it well, but what I was trying to say was this. For 26 years, every Christmas Eve, I sat in that room and believed something. I believed that my family was the kind of family that could look at each other and tell the truth. That we were built differently from other families. That all those small confessions, the stolen candy, the library book, the scholarship story, the real fear, were the reason we loved each other the way we did, which was loudly and imperfectly and with a loyalty that I had taken completely for granted. I still believe that, mostly. I believe it about my dad. I believe it about Uncle Dave, who sat next to her and didn't leave. I believe it about Richie, who kept the secret for 3 years and then, when the question landed in his hands, decided he was done. I just don't know what we are now. What shape we are. Whether the shape still has room for Christmas Eve in western Pennsylvania, 34 people, fire going, snow coming down. Whether the tradition that cracked us open is also the thing that might, eventually, let us heal. My grandmother made a rule when I was 7 years old. No lying, no dodging, no I'd rather not say. Last Christmas Eve, at 78, with arthritis in her hands and a bad hip and a filing cabinet full of old paperwork, I think she finally followed it. I'm not sure if that's a tragedy or not. I'm not sure it isn't also, in some long and painful way, a kind of love. That's the story. I've been sitting on it for 3 months and I needed to put it somewhere. If you made it to the end, thank you for reading. I don't really know what I'm looking for by posting this. Maybe just to know that other families have had their version of the wooden box, the warm room, the question that changed everything. Maybe just to say it out loud. No lying, no dodging, no I'd rather not say. Subscribe for more stories like this.